All right, so buckle up, because today we are diving deep, and I mean deep, into B.F. Jackson's The Mystery of Satan and the Devil.
Ooh, that title alone sounds intense.
Yeah, it's not exactly light reading, let me tell you. We're talking about some pretty intense and, let's just say, unconventional perspectives on good and evil.
Well, I'm intrigued. What's the source material like?
Okay, so imagine a blend of biblical interpretations, historical figures, and even some mythology, all woven together to paint this, well, pretty unsettling picture of the world.
Sounds like a fascinating, albeit maybe a little creepy, read.
You got that right. So the big question we're tackling in this deep dive is, what does this book tell us about the nature of Satan? And how does it differ from, what you might call mainstream Christian beliefs?
Right, because I'm guessing there's some pretty significant departures from traditional theology here.
Oh yeah, big time. And one of the most striking things you encounter right off the bat is Jackson's claim that, and I'm quoting here, Jewry is the same thing as the synagogue of Satan.
Whoa, okay, so he's not mincing words there. What exactly does he mean by that?
Basically, he's saying that Jewish people as a whole, not just individuals who stray from the path or anything, are inherently evil and connected to Lucifer.
That's a pretty bold and frankly troubling statement.
It is. And to understand his reasoning, we need to unpack this idea of the synagogue of Satan.
Yeah, break that down for us. What's the significance of that phrase in Jackson's worldview?
He believes that essentially Jewish people secretly worship Lucifer and are actively working towards, get this, world domination.
World domination, huh? That's a familiar theme in a lot of conspiracy theories.
Right, and he even uses this image of an upside-down synagogue to represent what he calls spiritual inversion. Like everything's flipped, good is bad, up is down, that kind of thing.
Interesting. It's definitely a loaded image for sure. But does he get into specifics about how this supposed world domination would play out?
He does. He believes that ultimately it would culminate in the rule of a Jewish emperor.
Okay, so there's a whole hierarchy to this synagogue of Satan with a specific leader at the top.
Exactly. But it goes even deeper than that. He also has some very, let's just say, unique ideas about the origins of what he calls the Serpent race.
Okay, Serpent race. This is where things start to get a little creepy, right?
A little. He's basically saying that Jewish people aren't just followers of a different faith. They're a completely separate race, a counterfeit race, descended from, wait for it, Cain and Lilith.
Whoa, Cain and Lilith. That's not your typical Sunday school lesson.
Definitely not. And to make things even stranger, he actually lists physical differences that supposedly distinguish this serpent race from humanity.
Like what kind of differences is he talking about?
Well, some of them are kind of plausible, I guess, like differences in white blood cell counts or something.
Right, I mean, there are certainly genetic variations between different populations.
Exactly. But then he gets into some really out there stuff, like claiming that Jewish people lack a floating rib and have unique fingerprint patterns.
Those claims sound a lot less plausible. And frankly, they echo some pretty harmful historical stereotypes used to dehumanize and otherize Jewish people.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's disturbing to see these kinds of pseudoscientific claims being used to justify such harmful beliefs.
Absolutely. And it's important to point out that those claims have no basis in scientific fact.
Agreed. It's crucial to approach this material with a critical eye.
For sure. And just to add another layer to this already bizarre mix, Jackson brings in Kali, the Hindu goddess of bloodshed, and connects her to the serpent race as their ancestral mother.
Kali, wow, okay, so now we're really venturing outside the bounds of traditional Christian theology here.
Definitely. He's drawing from all sorts of different religious and mythological traditions to construct his narrative.
Yeah, it's like he's creating this ideological Frankenstein's monster, stitching together bits and pieces from different sources to create something that's both fascinating and deeply unsettling.
That's a great way to put it. It's like he's building a puzzle using pieces from different sets, forcing them together to form a picture that doesn't quite fit.
Exactly. So the question is, how does he connect these abstract and, frankly, disturbing ideas to real-world organizations and events?
Well, this is where the B'nai B'rith comes in.
The B'nai B'rith. Like the Jewish service organization.
The one and the same.
But what do they have to do with all of this?
Well, most people know the B'nai B'rith as, a community organization focused on charity and good works. But in Jackson's view, it's something far more sinister. He believes it's actually a Luciferian Masonic lodge, a secret society dedicated to practicing black magic and wielding hidden power.
Okay, so now we're venturing into serious conspiracy theory territory. Black magic What are we talking about here?
Well, according to Jackson, they're involved in some pretty dark rituals, culminating in, this is where it gets really disturbing, human sacrifice.
Human sacrifice. Wow, that takes us to a pretty dark place.
It does. And he ties these alleged sacrifices to a quest for immortality, suggesting that they're part of some twisted attempt to achieve eternal life.
That's heavy stuff. But who's the mastermind behind all of this? Does Jackson name a specific leader of this evil cabal?
He does. He points to a figure he calls Prince Abdul Baraba Baha, claiming that this guy is destined to become the Jewish emperor, the Gog, spoken of in the book of Ezekiel.
Prince Abdul Baraba Baha. Okay, I've never heard of him.
Yeah, he's not exactly a household name. And get this, Jackson even provides a specific date for this prince's supposed rise to power, 1953.
1953, huh? Obviously that didn't happen. So how does Jackson account for this, slight miscalculation?
Well, that's a great question, and it gets to the heart of how Jackson views Satan. He doesn't see him as this single entity confined to a particular point in time, but as a force that manifests in different individuals throughout history.
So it's like Satan's playing a long game, jumping from one pawn to another across the centuries.
Exactly. So even though this particular prince didn't fulfill his supposed destiny in 1953, Jackson would probably say that it doesn't invalidate his whole theory. He'd probably just say that Satan's plans were delayed, or maybe he found a new puppet to play with.
That's a pretty chilling thought. So in his view, the threat's always there, lurking beneath the surface, just waiting for the right moment to strike.
Right. It's this constant, ever-present danger, always adapting, always evolving.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, and it's a lot to process, but we've only just scratched the surface. Want to go deeper? Stick around, and we'll unpack even more of the wild claims in B.F. Jackson's The Mystery of Satan and the Devil.
All right, welcome back to our deep dive into B.F. Jackson's The Mystery of Satan and the Devil.
Yeah, we're picking up right where we left off, exploring the, let's just say, unique worldview presented in this book.
And remember, folks, we're not endorsing these ideas. We're just trying to understand them, analyze them, and see where they lead.
Critical thinking is key here, people. Don't just take anything at face value, question everything.
Absolutely. And as we delve deeper into Jackson's claims, keep in mind that he often blends real historical events with his own, let's say, creative interpretations.
It's like he's building a house of cards, stacking one flimsy claim on top of another, and hoping it doesn't all come crashing down.
A very apt analogy. So let's talk about this Prince Abdul Baraba Baha. We left off with Jackson claiming that this guy was the future Jewish emperor.
Yeah, the so-called Gog from the book of Ezekiel.
Yeah.
But that was supposed to happen back in 1953, right?
That's what Jackson claimed.
Obviously didn't happen. So how does he explain that little discrepancy?
Well, remember, Jackson sees Satan as this force that can manifest in different individuals throughout history. So even though this particular prince didn't, take over the world in 1953, Jackson would probably just say that it doesn't disprove his theory.
So it's like Satan's got this backup plan? Or maybe he just hit the snooze button on his world domination alarm clock.
Right. The threat is always there, just waiting for the right moment to reemerge.
Yeah.
But let's get back to this Prince Abdul Baraba Baha. What else does Jackson say about him?
Yeah, what's the deal with this mysterious prince?
Well, Jackson claims that he's a direct descendant of the Turco-Mongol lineage.
Turco-Mongol, huh? That's pretty specific.
It is, and it connects his claims to a specific cultural and historical context, like he's trying to ground his theory in something real. He even goes into this whole genealogy, tracing the prince's lineage back through centuries of rulers.
Oh, so he's like building a family tree of evil, a whole dynasty of devils.
Pretty much. He's basically saying that this prince is the culmination of centuries of, satanic bloodlines. But like we said, his timeline's clearly off, so how does he reconcile that with his worldview?
Yeah, if this guy was supposed to be the big bad, and he didn't show up on schedule, doesn't that kind of poke a hole in Jackson's whole theory?
You'd think so, but remember, Jackson sees Satan as a force that operates outside of linear time. So even though this particular prince didn't fulfill his supposed destiny, Jackson could just say that Satan's plans were delayed, or maybe he just manifested in a different form.
So it's like a get-out-of-jail-free card for his theory. No matter what happens, he can always twist it to fit his narrative.
Exactly. It's a hallmark of a lot of conspiracy theories. They're designed to be unfalsifiable. No matter what evidence you throw at them, they can always adapt and find a way to explain it away.
So how does Jackson believe this supposed satanic plot plays out in the real world? What are the devil's tactics, according to him?
Well, he outlines a pretty multi-pronged approach, a whole playbook for how he believes the devil, or in this case, Jewish people, are working to undermine and destroy Christian nations.
Okay, so, like, what's in this playbook? What kind of tactics are we talking about?
He claims they use things like fear, blackmail, and even mind control to manipulate and weaken their enemies.
Whoa, mind control. That sounds a little far-fetched, even for this guy.
I know, right? But let's break down these tactics one by one. So first, there's fear.
Okay, how does he believe fear is being used as a weapon in this, supposed spiritual war?
Well, he argues that the devil, through his various human manifestations, like this Prince Abdul Baraba Baha or whoever, instills fear in the hearts of Christians to make them more susceptible to control.
So it's like a psychological warfare strategy, right? Break them down mentally, make them afraid, and then you can control them more easily.
Exactly. And he suggests that this fear could take many forms, like fear of economic collapse, social unrest, violence, persecution, that kind of thing.
Yeah, like play on people's anxieties, their insecurities, their deepest fears.
Right. Create a climate of uncertainty and fear, and then you can exploit that to your advantage.
Okay, that's fear. What about blackmail? How does that fit into the picture?
Well, Jackson suggests that Jewish people, or, those he considers to be agents of the devil, use blackmail to gain leverage over powerful individuals within Christian societies.
Oh, so it's like they're infiltrating the system, getting dirt on people, and then using that to control them.
Exactly. It's all about compromising material that can be used to force people to do your bidding.
And what kind of compromising material are we talking about here?
He's pretty vague on the specifics, but he suggests that it could involve things like personal secrets, financial vulnerabilities, even threats against their families.
Wow, so it's like a whole network of spies and manipulators pulling strings behind the scenes.
It's a very paranoid view of the world, for sure. And then, of course, there's the mind control aspect.
Yeah, let's talk about that. How does Jackson believe this mind control works? Does he get into any specifics?
Well, this is where his concept of the beast system comes in, which we touched on earlier.
Right, the beast system. Refresh our memory on that one.
Basically, he believes this system is controlled by Jewish people and is designed to spread erroneous thinking, like undermine Christian faith and values, and ultimately lead to spiritual death.
So it's like a giant brainwashing machine, pumping out propaganda and misinformation to warp people's minds.
That's one way to put it. He sees it as this insidious force that's slowly eroding Christian beliefs and paving the way for the devil's ultimate triumph.
Okay, so what are the components of this beast system? Like, how does it actually operate in the real world?
Well, he points to a lot of different institutions and cultural trends as evidence of its influence.
Like what? Give us some examples.
He talks about things like secular education, mass media, certain forms of entertainment, pretty much anything that he sees as promoting secular values and lifestyles.
So basically anything that doesn't align with his very narrow and specific interpretation of Christianity is part of this evil beast system.
Yeah, pretty much. It's a very black and white view of the world. There's good, which is his version of Christianity, and then there's everything else, which is all part of this grand conspiracy to destroy Christian civilization.
It's a pretty bleak outlook for sure. So if this beast system is so powerful and pervasive, how does Jackson believe it can be resisted? Is there any hope, according to him?
Well, he puts a lot of emphasis on personal awakening and spiritual resilience.
Like, what does that mean?
He urges Christians to wake up to the supposed threat posed by the synagogue of Satan and the beast system, to recognize the enemy within their midst.
So it's like a call to action, a rallying cry to rise up and fight back against this perceived evil.
Exactly. He wants people to become aware of the danger, to arm themselves spiritually, and to resist the influence of the beast system in all its forms.
But what does that resistance look like in practice? What are the specific actions he advocates for?
Well, he's a little vague on that. He talks about the need for spiritual vigilance, discernment, and a return to traditional Christian values.
Okay, but what does that actually mean in terms of real-world actions?
He doesn't really get into specifics. He just kind of throws out these general calls for spiritual warfare without really explaining what that entails.
So it's all very abstract and open to interpretation.
Exactly. And that's what makes it potentially dangerous. When you combine his apocalyptic worldview with these vague calls to action, it's easy to see how it could be interpreted as a justification for violence and extremism.
Yeah, it's like he's planting the seeds for a holy war without explicitly saying so. And that's what's so concerning about these kinds of ideologies. they can easily be twisted and manipulated to justify all sorts of harmful actions.
You're absolutely right. It's a slippery slope, and that's why it's so important to analyze and understand these beliefs to see where they lead and what potential dangers they might pose.
Well said. And that's what we're trying to do here, folks. We're not here to endorse these ideas, but to deconstruct them, to expose the flaws in their logic, and to hopefully prevent them from taking root and spreading.
Exactly. Critical thinking is our best defense against these kinds of harmful ideologies.
So stay with us as we continue to unpack the unsettling worldview of B.F. Jackson and explore his predictions about the final confrontation between good and evil.
All right, welcome back to our final deep dive into B.F. Jackson's The Mystery of Satan and the Devil.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground, explored some pretty intense ideas.
We have, and remember folks, this is all about understanding, not endorsing. We're just laying out Jackson's theories here, trying to make sense of them.
Exactly. And as we enter this final chapter of his narrative, it's not exactly sunshine and rainbows, let me tell you.
It's definitely not a happy ending. Jackson's ultimate vision is one of apocalyptic conflict.
So we're talking end-of-the-world stuff here. Fire and brimstone, the whole shebang.
Pretty much. He believes that history is inevitably moving towards this final showdown between good and evil, as he defines them, of course.
Right, because his definitions of good and evil are, well, let's just say a little bit skewed.
To say the least. So who are the players in this cosmic battle? Who's on each side?
Well, according to Jackson, it's Christian Israel, which he equates with Anglo-Saxon nations, versus the forces of the devil, which he equates with, well, you guessed it, Jewry.
Wow, so it's this whole racial and religious clash of civilizations.
Yeah, it's pretty disturbing stuff. And it's important to remember that these categories are completely arbitrary and incredibly harmful. It's just Jackson's twisted interpretation of the world, not any kind of objective reality.
Absolutely. It's dangerous to essentialize entire groups of people like that. But let's delve into the specifics of this final battle. How does Jackson see it playing out?
Okay, so picture this. The devil, through his control of the beast system, is trying to enslave Christian nations and destroy their faith.
Ah, yes, the beast system, that shadowy network of manipulators we talked about earlier.
Right. He believes they'll use deception, manipulation, coercion, all the dirty tricks to undermine Christian values and weaken their resolve.
So basically, it's a war of attrition, slowly wearing down the enemy from within.
Exactly. And the ultimate goal is to create this global totalitarian state ruled by the synagogue of Satan.
A classic conspiracy theory narrative, the evil cabal controlling everything from the shadows. But what makes this so disturbing is that Jackson specifically identifies a real-world group as the enemy.
Yeah, he's not just talking about some abstract force of evil. He's pointing the finger at Jewish people, and that's where his work crosses a very dangerous line.
Absolutely. It's scapegoating, plain and simple. And it can have very real-world consequences, inciting hatred and violence against innocent people.
Yeah, it's important to call that out and make sure people understand the danger of this kind of rhetoric. So how does Jackson believe Christian Israel will ultimately win this war?
Well, he places a lot of emphasis on spiritual awakening and resistance.
So like a call to arms for Christians to rise up and fight back against this perceived enemy.
Right. He urges them to recognize the threat, reject the influence of the beast system, and reclaim their spiritual power.
Okay, but what does that look like in practice?
He's kind of vague on the specifics. He talks about returning to traditional values, strengthening faith, and even hints at the possibility of physical confrontation.
Wait, physical confrontation? As in, like, actual violence?
It's not entirely clear. He uses a lot of ambiguous language, which is part of the problem.
Yeah, that ambiguity can be really dangerous. It allows people to interpret his words in ways that justify their own prejudices and violent tendencies.
Absolutely, and it's something to be very wary of.
So, in Jackson's grand narrative, what happens to the devil and his followers in the end? Do they get redeemed, or is it a more final outcome?
Well, Jackson doesn't offer much hope for redemption. He predicts their complete and utter destruction and annihilation.
Wow, so there's no forgiveness, no second chances in his worldview.
None whatsoever. It's all about punishment and retribution.
It's a pretty grim ending, and it really highlights the depth of his hatred and intolerance.
It does. And it's a reminder that even though we might dismiss this as just one man's crazy ideas, these kinds of ideologies still exist out there, and they can be very dangerous.
Absolutely. So folks, as we wrap up this deep dive, remember to stay vigilant. Question everything. Don't let fear and hatred dictate your worldview.
Exactly. Choose knowledge, choose empathy, choose understanding.
And remember, we're all in this together. Let's work towards a world where these kinds of divisive ideologies have no place.